Welcome to this hug, where we're going to be talking about connected systems, of course, for the education audience. And a lot of the time, this is aimed at reducing admin and improving visibility, but ultimately, we're going to be talking about how you get your other systems talking to HubSpot and the data in them, hosted by myself, the AI lead, and one of the consultants here at HubGem. So, in terms of today's agenda, then, we're going to start off with why connecting systems matter, and actually, some of that would have been weaved into the conversations that you had with us and HubSpot and why you're ultimately there with using HubSpot. But there's additional bits certainly that you'll be using we can include there. Where disconnection actually happens as well, sometimes you don't even really notice that potentially systems could be connected up together. So how to sort of spot that. And then finally choosing the right approach in terms of actually getting these systems talking to each other, as there's a few different ways, and looking a little bit sort of future looking towards the end with some new and exciting bits around AI as well. So, I mean, the good news is you've already invested in your tech stack because you're using HubSpot. And if you're not, and you're actually watching this and thinking about HubSpot, then certainly the place to start. But if you're at the point where you've sort of gone through the implementation of HubSpot, you've got rid of your spreadsheets, your event data's coming in there, your EBS systems may be connected up, but you still think, you've got data in other places, we haven't quite got the full picture. At this point, your tech stack is rarely going to be the problem. And actually, it's just visibility of where all of this stuff is feeding into that's probably going to be the bigger blocker. So let's actually get into why connecting up all of these systems matter in the first place. Now, as we said, you have HubSpot, which is great. You've already connected up quite a few of those student and prospective journeys, but no doubt there'll be other systems and systems that sort of out of the box might not necessarily even sort of communicate with HubSpot, but there are some that do, and we'll get onto that in a little bit. Now, HubSpot, of course, for anyone certainly from our audience, has already helped, by bringing in your marketing and your admissions into one place, along with, of course, all of that nice, rich CRM data and reporting that comes with that. Hopefully, as well, it's reduced the reliance on spreadsheets. They do still have their place in a few different sort of situations, but for the most part, your data is now in a CRM with a really nice reporting function and with AI tools where you can ask it the questions and probe and brainstorm about that data. Of course, you also have improved visibility across your whole process as well with the use of deals, or at least some sort of pipeline setup that you've got in the account, where you can very easily track and see, where your prospects are in that journey. However, most of you will also be using one of the other systems that we've got here as examples on the right side. So some sort of MIS system, certainly ISAMs, Engage, all the others that of course exist out there. You might also be using of course, your own website not hosted in HubSpot, but also forms that aren't hosted in HubSpot as well as, for example, Dropform or Gravity Forms do actually have some features that HubSpot forms don't, that you might genuinely need and have started to adopt them as a way to sort of filter those communications through. And also WordPress, of course, is the big one for websites as well. With events, any real external booking system that you use, Eventbrite is probably the big one. We always sort of recommend and work with simple events as well. So anything really where you're sort of managing that ticketing of your events is going to be external, as HubSpot doesn't have a kind of built-in version for that. And then I think the one that everybody definitely struggles with, certainly at some point in the journey, is kind of finance and payments. So even if you're kind of to take in deposits and some of those initial fees, perhaps through your HubSpot process, at some point there is a finance system outside of HubSpot in the background in your finance team, where of course the data is not quite the same across the two systems. So ultimately, if you feel like you've got some of these, the question's not really whether or not you should be connecting them. The answer to that is definitely yes. The question really is knowing where to start with them. So where does the disconnection actually happen here then, in terms of some of those examples that we just looked at? Well, if we have a look at some of the common challenges, certainly that we see, one of the big ones is the MIS system of choice for your organization. That really, at some point, you need to pass the data from that application or from that enrollment, whatever ultimate status it ends up in, needs to go somewhere else for you to sort of manage timetabling and tutoring and all the rest of it, not something that HubSpot is really built there to do. So right now, at some point, again, in that journey, your student data is going to sit in that MIS system. Of course, all of the really rich data that we got throughout the admissions and marketing process is sitting in HubSpot. And if there is a sync, you might not have one at all, but even if you do have one created, it's probably a little bit manual, or actually too late. And by too late, we mean it's probably not a live sync. So if, mum comes in, submits a form to update her address information, how long does that actually take to then update in the MIS if it's not a live sort of ongoing sync? So ultimately what this means then, you're going to have kind of two versions of someone's record, held in different places and potentially that has different information. So certainly some of your admissions teams and teams further on in that journey once they've enrolled might be looking at that and thinking, okay, well, which one is actually the data I can trust? Certainly some manual data entry, or the need for some reconciliation of that data as well, once it gets passed between the systems. And like I said, ultimately you might get certainly teams that don't trust one of the systems, or really aren't sure which one actually is the one they should be using as the source of truth. Now, if we can get this connected up, and we should try to, again, we'll talk about a few methods to do so in a bit. But once you have got that connection made, well, now you've got clear ownership. Your teams know exactly what the sort of relationship is between the systems. So HubSpot is there for the enrollment, MIS is there for the enrolled student record, and they've got confidence that when they bridge that gap, the data is the same in both places. You'll also have automatic syncs at key stages, or certainly would want to build that in if you're thinking of doing so, so that when you move that deal into the enrolled stage, that triggers a sync straight into the MIS, populates it all with that information. And if you want to think about doing two-way syncs as well, there might be certainly the need in HubSpot to continue using the marketing tools. You can then have any updates in the MIS system passed back in there as well for targeting. And then, of course, any shared fields as well. So making sure that if what we're capturing in HubSpot and the MIS vice versa, we actually have a place for it to go in the other system as well for your key bits around student details and the parent relationships. Now, if your MIS doesn't have a native integration out of the box, more than likely a bespoke solution is going to be the right approach, and we'll talk a bit about that again later in the session. Another common challenge is event management. So like we talked about an Eventbrite example, where you've got a nice sort of ticketing system, sign-up system, and you're probably also using that to sort of tick people off, or when they sort of check in. But right now, those registrations, if you don't have that connected up, are going to be tracked totally separately to HubSpot, and will probably include some sort of manual logging or an import, or even worse, having to do it one by one across the records. And if that is a lot of work, you might not even be doing that at all. So the data's not even there. And of course, not having all of that will mean that our follow-ups are not very personalized, very much an automated email to everybody that attended, potentially delayed as well, because that process of taking your event data and getting it into the CRM is not probably going to happen on the same day. And like we said, manual. So always time consuming when we have to do that route. Now, if we get this connected up, whatever event system is that we choose, if you're not sure on one to start with, we'd recommend Simple Events for sure and checking that one out. But once that is connected up, the registration and the attendance, and of course, therefore, the no-show data that you need, can be updated automatically in the marketing events object and on the contacts record, whoever it was that signed up. The workflows then that we trigger, with the sort of follow-up and sort of nurture comms post-event, can not only be triggered in a more personal way, but also the content within the email can be more personal as well, because we've just got the context of that conversation we had with them on the day, or what they were really interested in, or what they enjoyed. And then, of course, your segmentation of your CRM as well. Much easier to then actually have a segment for kind of those three main groups: so the registered, the attended, the no-shows. And then even thinking about segmentation by event type as well. A lot of our clients will have a big open day kind of event where everyone can come, but they'll also do more personal touch points, maybe one-to-one visits and tours and things like that as well. If you are in the market for an event tool, like I said, Simple Events would be a great place to start, unless you need a vast amount of kind of ticketing for an event with very, very large numbers. But definitely look out for when making this decision that does have some sort of integration with the CRM, because your event platform might be amazing, but if the data is not in HubSpot, you can't do a lot with it. And the third big one that I touched on is the kind of finance and payments part of the whole process. It's one, of course, where HubSpot can support with routing after a form submission to go ahead and make that deposit or payment. But ultimately, where that payment hits and the finance team and how they're managing all of that is going to be in a separate system, a QuickBooks, a Xero, or whatever that your organization uses. So most of those payments are not going to be linked to an application or a student record, or even really have visibility of which of the parent or guardians perhaps made the payment. When admissions naturally, as part of their main process, have to then chase some of these payments as well, how do we know what the status is? Are we sending people emails chasing when actually we've got the money, we just didn't talk to finance, and that kind of whole mess? And ultimately, finance and admissions not being aligned, certainly on a kind of a live basis. You might touch in every couple of days or once a week, get an updated spreadsheet or something. But if that payment's made at 10:30, you're not going to know at 10:31 for sure. When this is connected up, then, and depending, of course, again on the finance platform that you use, the statuses can be passed across at least onto the deal or onto the student record. So you'll probably have some sort of stage within your pipeline that focuses on deposit needs to be paid, or some sort of fee stage, and we can update that status and move them through the pipeline, of course, with that. Also then using that to trigger the payment confirmations and next steps. So once the payment's made, here's what we need from you next, or here's what to look forward to next. Those kind of emails can be triggered on a definitive status. And of course, clear reporting then as well, and on some of that finance stuff in HubSpot, because again, the reporting from the finance side can often be held outside of the main CRM. So ultimately, when you come to sort of optimize your process for the following year, you want to look at, well, were there bottlenecks in the fees process? And you're not really going to have too much data on perhaps why that was. So one of the easiest ones, if you already use it or again are kind of open to using a new provider, is to think about using Stripe payments. Definitely for things like deposits off the back of a redirect form submission or something like that, because then that's super easy to do all within HubSpot. You've still got a separate platform for the finance team, but you've got a really nice integration that will do a lot of the legwork for you there. So what does a really good connected journey actually look like then? And this is very visual and very simplified, of course, but ultimately all of these touch points need to be feeding into HubSpot, and of course feeding onto the correct student record and parent record as well. So if we start off where everybody usually does, sort of creating the deal, creating the student at the inquiry stage. Of course, if you're not using HubSpot forms at that point in time, that's the first touch point that we need to get connected up with that drop form, gravity form, whatever it is that you're using, to make sure that we're creating the records in the account and we've got the right data on the right student records. We'll then move on to something like an event, whether it's a personal tour, open day, whatever. Get them in, see the grounds, the campus, what you're sort of offering, give them a great day. And again, if you're using an external platform for sign-ups there, and ticketing and that kind of thing, and certainly booking them in when you meet them on the day, again, that needs to be passed across. Otherwise, we've really got no hope of understanding what the sort of path was that student took, and also all of the reporting, the follow-up comms. Which brings us to the next one. And really that follow-up sent can be your kind of keep warm, your nurturing comms at any point in the journey between, right, we've really shown them how good we are. We just need to push them to make the application now. You need the data for the segmentation, the relevance, the personalization, all the good stuff that you want to include in your marketing. The application's then submitted, started. A lot of our clients, well, some of our clients will actually have the application form maybe within the MIS system itself, so it just goes straight in there, so no connection needed at that point. But then how do you get it back into HubSpot for the rest of the journey and the follow-ups and whatnot? So depending on how you have the application form set up, there'll be some direction the data needs to be passed there. Then the payment, of course, and the acceptance piece. If you've got sort of e-signing options for your things like offer letters and whatnot, again, we'd want that passed in the direction whichever way it needs to go. just to make sure again that we can progress, certainly from a HubSpot side, the deal through the different steps and trigger all the automations. And then, of course, student being enrolled. If this is a process that you manage outside of HubSpot, again, we'd still want it talking to HubSpot to complete the deal, if you like, and then making sure that the reporting is accurate with the timings that all of this took. So depending on, of course, your setup, you can see all of these touch points. If the data is not being passed across, then becomes a bit of a gap in the process. Now, we talked a lot about the bad stuff and what it can look like if you don't have these connections created. And if you resonate with any of that, you're probably in that bucket of users. So actually now, how do you choose the right approach to get these connected up? And the first and easiest and often the most cost effective is a native integration. And what we mean by that is something that already exists, something that HubSpot or a HubSpot partner has already built and is in the app marketplace. So just like with your iPhone, when you go onto the App Store and download Instagram, doesn't come with the phone, but it increases the functionality and the usefulness of what you can do with it. Same idea here with HubSpot. It can't do everything out of the box. It knows that, and that's why there's over 1,000 partners that have pre-built integrations that act very much like an application. Whether that's from Teams, Zoom, your OneDrive, Google Drive, wherever it is, all of the big players have one, and there's some niche ones in there as well. None of this requires custom development, of course, because just like an app, you install it and you're kind of good to go. And of course, this means you can kind of trust it a little bit more because it's authentic. There's some things to look out for that we'll touch on in a moment. And you also get the ability to map the fields and where you want them to go and kind of control how that sync works and when it should happen and turn it on and off and those kinds of things as well. Now, some things to check if you do visit the marketplace that are really important, and we'll jump into a screen share in a minute to show you where to find these. But always review the actual functionality of the app before you install it. Just because you've found the app for the piece of software that you wanted to sync from doesn't necessarily mean what you want to sync from in terms of a field or an object or whatever it is included in the integration. Not all apps sync every field. Is sort of the thing to watch out for. And then also check the data flow direction as well, because it's not always two-way. You can't always influence what way it is. Some integrations will be set up specifically to go one way, and kind of that's all it can do. So let me drop out of the slides for a moment, start to sort of jump into a typical HubSpot marketplace window. If you sort of visit the marketplace and go into the apps section, you'll see something like this. Got the search bar at the top, so you can always sort of search for whatever it is you wanted. If I wanted to check if LinkedIn, let's say, had an app, you can sort of search for it. And below there's always kind of new arrivals and suggestions and all the rest of it down there as well. Once you've found the one ultimately that you want to sort of have a look at, let's say I wanted to get some of my Microsoft Team meeting data into the CRM where I might be having some meetings with prospects, over a video call. Once you've found the app, click into it. The big thing I'd always recommend looking for right off the bat is HubSpot certified app. That just gives you a little bit more comfort that it's kind of set up in the right way with the data protections and all the rest of it. HubSpot are kind of aware that it exists, have approved it, and it's kind of the main one, if you like. A great example is if you search for WhatsApp. There's loads of different WhatsApp apps. Only one of them is actually the one built by WhatsApp and HubSpot. So just be careful and look out for that sort of badge there. Below that, one of the things, the next thing to check before you get disappointed by anything is to check it's actually compatible with your plan as well. So you don't want to go in and find something awesome that you really want and then realize it won't work. So next thing to check to avoid a bit of disappointment there. Below that, you've then got the features. Always a useful place to come and sort of visit just to kind of see a bit more visually what the integration can actually do. So if you wanted to trigger a workflow off the back of this sync happening, for example, you can come in here and see, oh, okay, look, we've got the ability to use some workflow options there. Even more important than that, though, for me, is the app functionality section, because even though all of this stuff can look nice and sound great, this is actually showing you what happens, where it's syncing from, and the direction that it's syncing between as well. So in here, actually, look, it looks really great in terms of the features, loads of good stuff in there, screenshots and all the rest of it. But actually, all I can do is pass a HubSpot notification as a DM in Teams and just sync messages and conversations both ways. So there's actually not a huge amount of value, and potentially not in the direction that you wanted it to go either, with this particular integration. So always check that. And again, with the sync direction, it'll be very clear sort of where the data is getting passed. So even in this example, if you wanted the DMs to go into HubSpot, it won't do that either. There are reviews here as well. Always worth sort of dipping into a few reviews, especially recent ones. And then below there'll be some pricing information on any of these integrations as well. And most of the time, this will be a subscription to the tool that you're trying to integrate with. So you've probably already got one. So if I wanted to integrate, Teams here, let's say, I've probably already got a Microsoft 365 account at the level I needed to be. Now, if there is a situation where you sort of find yourself that there isn't, a native integration available, or the native integration doesn't really do what you want it to do, then we've got the sort of bespoke option, if you like. And this is more where you actually need to sort of reach out either through us if you're working with us, or of course, sort of find a HubSpot sort of developer partner, if you like, that is capable of actually creating a totally bespoke solution for you outside of the marketplace, something they will build and host for you, and sort of talk you through, what's needed to set that up. Ultimately, with a bespoke solution, a lot of the time this will particularly be useful for legacy systems. So a lot of sort of older MIS systems, if you're sort of using those, anything where it doesn't have sort of like a publicly accessible API for tools that you can use as front end users, there'll need to be some sort of specialist developer support in here. And ultimately, that sort of developer, as well as sort of building that out for you, will kind of be the middleware in our little graph here. So system A will be where you want to get the data from, so Teams in our previous example, and system B will be HubSpot, of course, our CRM that we want that meetings data to go into. The middleware will be effectively what the developer creates for you and hosts for you as well on their servers. So if you ever sort of start to think, this is probably the approach we're going to need to go down, actually start to have a real good think about your process requirements. You don't need to worry about the technical capabilities. They've got all that, and they'll be able to sort all of that out for you. What they need from you is really what this needs to look like. So in terms of a really great place to start planning this, with really any integration, is field mapping, and a bit of the data logic in there as well. Because when you connect up these systems, they're going to be building this for you, some sort of code base or some sort of API that's going to need to be used. And they're going to need to know the most important part, which is where your data is coming from, the direction it should be synced from, any transformation in the middle, and then where it should ultimately end up. And some examples on here and kind of what this means if we break this down. The source field is ultimately where the information is coming from. So in our Teams example, again, this might be a direct message. This might be a call recording that's been generated off the back of a meeting, something that is triggering ultimately this to happen. And then, of course, where that data is within that application or piece of software. The direction is then you telling the developer where you want this to go. So like we said, we can either have it from sort of source to target, or we can have it sort of both ways. So syncing back and forth the same information to keep both platforms updated as well. Of course, you can always think of this as HubSpot on the other side and Teams as well. So it doesn't have to just be source to target in that relationship. They can be either or, wherever ultimately the information starts. You've then got the transformation piece. Now, for some of this, you might not need it, but some examples here, if your sort of field in Teams, let's say, or whatever it is full name, you don't sort of separate first name and last name. In HubSpot, we do. So actually, the transformation would be a piece of sort of description, if you like, for the developer to say, we'll take the first word from this field to place it into the target field in the target app. So that instruction would take the full name of Olly Featherstone, only take the first word, Olly, and put that into the first name inside of HubSpot. So you don't have to re-engineer, your whole data structure in the other platform as well, just to fit HubSpot. You can have sort of translation layer in there as well. Another good one would be things like date of birth. If for whatever reason the format is different in your different sort of applications, of course you can sort of reconfigure that as well as it's passing the information across. And then ultimately making sure that this is kind of set up for the developer, not necessarily beforehand, but certainly having an idea of this and the expectation that this is what they're going to want you to do will be really useful for getting this up and running. Now, in terms of actually sort of evaluating then sort of future technology investments, worth sort of touching on this really, because now that you've got HubSpot or thinking about it, and certainly hopefully now want to have all of your systems connected after what we've been through, when you then go ahead and look at sort of new solutions in the future, new bits of software, always have this connectivity piece in mind when you're evaluating kind of how good it is ultimately. The big one is, does it have an open API? Can you actually tap in, whether it's through a pre-made integration, the developer support, doesn't really matter. If it doesn't have somewhere you can tap in to grab that information, you're not going to be able to create any of this. Can it integrate with what you already use out of the box is kind of the next big one. So you know you won't have to invest in that developer support. Does it already have, that integration in the marketplace? Will it support future integrations is then one that's maybe worth touching on. General buyer's advice would be never buy a product on a future promise, but if you really need that piece of software right now and they're committed that in 2 months this integration will be sorted, definitely something to take into consideration. And then if it can do at least one of those things, or hopefully all of them, ultimately, does it actually reduce silos, or is it just going to end up creating new ones? Most of the time, if everybody's on board in HubSpot and that's the direction of the flow of the data, you should be fine. But actually, if it's going back out the other way, will you end up creating teams that are now using different bits of software when you want them all in the one place? Big sort of tip there at the bottom as well. Two systems with the same features are not equal in terms of your decision making if one of them connects and one of them doesn't. So you might be in that situation where you're thinking, oh, okay, brilliant. Both of these things have the same feature set. We want to go ahead and use both of them. Well, actually, if one of them doesn't have an API, what's the point? So keep that one in mind as well. Now, last thing I want to touch on is that future-looking piece that I mentioned as well, with the opportunity of using AI as the connective layer that can do some of this stuff for you. And actually, for very basic automations where they have open APIs, you can start to think about setting up some bespoke integrations in a way, but much easier than what you would get from a developer. With this new MCP or Model Context Protocol, that is effectively a way for an AI agent that you can build in a really user-friendly front-end system to be able to communicate and connect to those other platforms that have those APIs. But we can do it as front-end users through plain text language, through prompts, essentially, rather than having to build, those coded solutions that we might want to go ahead and vibe code, but we don't really know what we're doing. Now, this is a massive emerging area worth keeping an eye on. It's in its infancy, but in HubSpot this does exist. And as a really quick sort of demo, again, wanted to just jump into how you can make use of an MCP right now inside of the Breeze Studio, and to go ahead and navigate to the Agents tab and create a custom agent within the account. Now, I'm going to start from scratch so I can skip all of the stuff that would take ages to do on this demo. But ultimately, once you've filled out the instructions and you've sort of set up this agent to do exactly what you want it to do, some sort of automated process that can save you some time, if you need to grab data from other platforms in order to give it the context or to even take action in other platforms, in the actions setup here, I can add an action. I can navigate to MCP. Again, it's in beta at the moment. One of the really great tools that we use at HubGem internally and recommend to any client really that can't achieve this natively in HubSpot is to connect up Zappia's MCP. Zappia is basically a developer in your pocket. You can use plain text language to tap into a whole host of different platforms and grab data from them, use that as triggers, and even take action in there as well. So worth keeping an eye on this, worth exploring it if you've got the confidence to do so inside of your account as well. Because this could potentially save you that sort of scenario where there's no native integration, but you don't want to have to, or there's no budget for a fully bespoke solution. So that brings me to the end of everything I wanted to talk about today. Have we got time for, or have we got any questions?
I think because we had a few technical issues, we don't have time for any questions, but what I will do is add that to all future emails. So if anybody does have any questions, they can, of course, get in touch and we will answer them. So apologies for that.
No worries.
Yeah. So moving on. Yeah. Basically, when you do get your kind of post e email with your little apology, you will also receive the recording of our lovely hug right there. Thank you, Ollie. And then I've got a blog all set up for you, ready to go. And we've also got a wee guide kind of relating to the hug topic today. So connected systems for education, which we will send out to you too. And you will also be sent out a wee kind of HubSpot resource as well to link towards. So yeah, please do subscribe to all our marketing and ambitions blog over at HubGem, where you will find an abundance of useful information. Yeah, please do enjoy your resources and please do keep an eye out for kind of future hug sessions. I have put on the next slide to kind of join in our LinkedIn user group. Oh no, I took that slide down. There we go. Perfect. But with Hivebright and when you link up to the Hugs, there is a wee community forum on that. So please do sign up to the Hug user group for education, where we are the kind of leaders, and you can get in touch and ask any questions there as well, where we can, yeah, get back and forth with you. So yes, please do look out for the next Hug, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Cheers.